I never thought I'd find love in a place filled with dust, echoes, and the faint smell of varnish. The old community center where I used to spend my teenage years practicing the violin had been abandoned for years. The wooden floors warped, the ceiling cracked from time and neglect. It was the kind of place you pass by without noticing, just another forgotten corner of a small town that was slowly fading into the background of modern life. But that place, those rooms, held the soundtrack of my youth, and on a rainy Thursday evening, they brought me back to someone I never thought I'd meet again. I used to go there every afternoon after school, playing violin in the same hall where the community orchestra practiced. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. The director, Mrs. Langford, always encouraged us to pour emotion into every note, to play like we were trying to tell a secret to the universe. Back then, music was everything. I met countless people who came and went, but there was one girl I remembered vividly. Elena. She was a pianist, quiet but always smiling, her fingers moving over the keys like they were telling stories words couldn't reach. We weren't close, just two teenagers orbiting the same world of rehearsals and late-night concerts. Then life happened. University, work, distance. The community center shut down, and everyone went their separate ways. I hadn't thought about that place in over 15 years, until one day a letter arrived in the mail. It wasn't an email or a text message, but an actual letter, written in careful handwriting that felt almost nostalgic. Reunion of the Greenfield Music Club, Saturday, 7 p.m., it read. For all who once played within these walls. One last night of music and memories. I almost didn't go. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Old faces, dusty chairs, maybe a broken piano. But something about that invitation tugged at me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was a quiet ache of wanting to revisit a part of myself I'd left behind. So I went. The building looked the same from the outside. Peeling paint, crooked steps, ivy crawling up the brick. But when I stepped inside, the sound of faint laughter and tuning instruments greeted me like a ghost from the past. They cleaned it up a little for the reunion, with string lights hanging across the ceiling and tables filled with old photos and sheet music. There were familiar faces everywhere, older, softer, lined with time, but their eyes still had the same spark. I was shaking hands and smiling, drifting from group to group, when I heard someone softly playing the piano near the stage. It was that same haunting melody I hadn't heard in years, the one Elena used to play during intermissions when everyone else was chatting and laughing. My heart stumbled. I turned, and there she was. Her hair was a little shorter now, darker, and her eyes carried something deeper than before. But when she smiled up at me, the years fell away. "You remember this piece?" she asked, her fingers still moving gently across the keys. "How could I forget?" I said, stepping closer. "You used to play it every time Mrs. Langford made us take a break." She laughed quietly. I didn't think anyone ever noticed. I told her that I had noticed, that I remembered sitting in the back of the room, listening to her play, pretending to tune my violin just to have an excuse to stay a little longer. She blushed, looking down at the keys like they held the answers to all the questions neither of us had asked back then. We spent the rest of the night talking about where life had taken us. Her move to another city, my career that had slowly drifted away from music, the way everything seemed to circle back to this tiny town no matter how far we ran. It turned out she'd been the one to organize the reunion. "I drove past the building a few months ago," she said. "It looked so lonely. I thought maybe it deserved one more night of music before it disappears for good." When the crowd thinned and the laughter quieted, I found her sitting by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. The piano behind her reflected in the dim light, and for a moment, it felt like time had folded in on itself. "Do you still play?" she asked me softly. I admitted I hadn't in years. My violin was somewhere in a closet, collecting dust. She smiled and said, "Then tonight's the night to change that." I hesitated, but she stood, walked to the stage, and handed me a violin that looked worn but loved. "I borrowed it from the school next door," she said, "just in case someone needed one." The first note was shaky. My fingers stumbled, my bow scratched too hard against the strings, but then I saw her watching me, and something inside clicked. We played together, Her on the piano, me on the violin, and the room filled with the sound of something old made new again. People stopped to listen, whispering softly. But for us, there was only the music. It was like the years between us dissolved in the melody, leaving only what could have been and what maybe still was. When the night ended, she walked me to the door, the air cool and smelling faintly of wet earth. "It's strange," she said, "how music brings people back together. Or maybe it never let us go," I said. She looked at me for a long moment before whispering, "Maybe." We exchanged numbers, promised to keep in touch. But you know how those promises usually go. Life gets away, and what feels urgent in one night can fade in the morning light. Yet this time, something was different. The next day, she texted me, "Coffee? There's a new cafe near the lake." And just like that, our story began again, not with fireworks or declarations, but with two people rediscovering the rhythm of something familiar. Weeks turned into months. We'd meet every Saturday, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes just sitting quietly. It wasn't about filling the silence. It was about sharing it. I found myself smiling at random moments during the day, hearing her laugh in my head, remembering the way her fingers danced when she spoke. But there was something she wasn't telling me. I could feel it. Every now and then, she'd drift off mid-conversation, her gaze far away, like she was chasing a thought she couldn't quite catch. I didn't push. I'd learned that sometimes silence holds more truth than words. One afternoon, we went back to the old community center together. It was quiet now, empty again, the lights gone, the dust returning. We sat on the floor where the piano used to be. She looked around and said, "I used to come here even after they closed it down. I'd sneak in and play. It made me feel less alone." Her voice cracked slightly. After my mom passed, this was the only place that still felt like her. She used to sit in the back during our rehearsals, remember? Always waving at me. I remembered her mother's smile, the way she clapped the loudest after every concert. "I didn't know," I said quietly. She shrugged, tears glinting in her eyes. "Grief's funny. It never really leaves. It just changes shape." I took her hand, and she let me. That night, under the flicker of the single light bulb that still worked, we kissed for the first time. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was slow, hesitant, filled with years of unspoken what-ifs. I thought that was the beginning of something beautiful, and maybe it was for a while. But life has its own rhythm, one that doesn't always follow the beat we expect. A few months later, she told me she was moving again, back to the city, for a new job, a new start. I tried to be happy for her, to tell her it was the right thing to do, but inside I felt that familiar ache of something slipping away. "We'll figure it out," she said. "We have phones, trains, weekends, but we both knew how distance works. It's not the miles, it's the silence between calls, the way routines rebuild themselves without you noticing. For a while we managed. Calls at midnight, surprise visits, letters tucked into books. But the visits grew fewer, the calls shorter. Then one day, the messages stopped. Weeks passed. I told myself she was busy, that she called that love, real love, could survive distance. Until one evening, a letter arrived. Just like the first one, handwritten. My heart sank before I even opened it. "I wanted to tell you in person," it began, "but I knew I wouldn't be able to say it out loud. I met someone. It wasn't planned. It just happened. He reminds me of the best parts of what we had. I'll always care about you, but I think our song has ended." I sat there for hours, the words blurring as the sun went down. I wanted to be angry, to hate her, but all I felt was a quiet emptiness, like a note that lingers long after the music stops. Years pass again. I moved, changed jobs, tried to move on. But every time I passed a music store, every time I heard a violin, that melody came back, the one she played on that rainy night. Then one winter evening, I found myself walking past the old community center. It was fenced off now, ready for demolition. I stood there in the cold, remembering everything, when a familiar tune floated through the air. It was faint, carried by the wind, but unmistakable. That same melody. I followed the sound to a small park nearby, where a group of students were performing. And there, in the front row, Sitting on a bench was Elena, older, different, but unmistakably her. She turned, and for a moment our eyes met. There was no grand reunion, no dramatic confession, just a small, knowing smile, the kind that says, "We were real once." I nodded, smiled back, and walked away. As I did, I realized that maybe not every love story is meant to last forever. Some are meant to remind us who we are, where we've been, and how deeply we're capable of feeling. That night, for the first time in years, I took my violin out of its case. The strings were stiff, the bow frayed, but when I played, I swore I could still hear a piano in the distance, answering every note.